Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us here at the Heritage Foundation in our Lewis Lehrman Auditorium. We'd ask everyone here in-house to make a courtesy check that cell phones have been turned off as we prepare to begin. We remind our internet viewers, who are of course attending as well, that they can send questions or comments to us simply emailing speaker@heritage.org, and we will post the program within 24 hours on our website for everyone's future reference. Hosting our special guest this afternoon is Phil Trueluck. Mr. Trueluck serves as Executive Vice President for the Heritage Foundation. Phil?
Thank you. Thank you. John does that announcement all the time because I'm usually the one that leaves my phone on. It's quite disconcerting if you're trying to introduce someone. Good afternoon. Welcome. Welcome to all of you. As John said, I'm Phil Trueluck. I'm Executive Vice President, Chief Operating Officer of the Heritage Foundation, and so delighted you could be with us here today. This is an extremely bittersweet moment for me personally. We've always loved having Congressman David Dreier over here, and we just thank him so much for all the service he has given to this country, and we appreciate it so much. We are truly going to miss you. I know you're going to be around, but we're truly going to miss your impact on Capitol Hill. Believe me, it's going to be noticed. But he's decided to retire and move on to other things, and I don't know if he's going to tell us anything about that today or not. That's up to him. But we have just had a wonderful working relationship with the Congressman for many, many years, and I think the most important to us anyway has been on a lot of the trade issues. And of course, probably close second behind that has been his the Rules Committee Chairman, where he just brought really sound conservative thought to the leadership circles in that position. But again, the reason he's here today is because of the trade issues. And since he came up here in 1980, which seems hard to believe, but it hasn't been that long, he has been a consistent and extremely effective advocate for free trade and free enterprise. And there aren't too many people who can list these kind of accomplishments, quite frankly, in any field, but he has done it. I mean, his incredible work, first with the U.S.-Canadian free trade agreement, then obviously with NAFTA after that, and also in the World Trade Organization, which in addition to setting that up, also instituted one of the largest global tax cuts in history. And also due to his extremely hard work, since 1980, U.S. tariff rates have dropped by 58%, and tariffs in other countries have fallen by 50%, just since 1998. And as a result of all of this work, and again, not many people can actually point and say, this does happen on my watch. The result of these lower trade barriers, the new technology and improvements in transportation, trade has increased from 20% of GDP in 1980 to more than 30% today. You've moved the dial. And as our index for economic freedom shows, countries with free trade always prosper more than countries that interfere with free trade. Again, we will miss David's steadfast support of free trade, and we do very much appreciate his leadership that he has exhibited in this town and around the country. Please welcome David Dreier.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Phil. We are standing at the Trueluck Shrine. John introduces this room as the Lou Lehrman room, but the fact of the matter is, as I walked to the outside and looked at the eagle and looked up at that, this is the house that Phil Trueluck had built. So we know what a great job that he's done on that. I should tell you that having been around as long as I have, I'm in my fourth decade in Congress now. I will say that I've been very honored that there are many people who have been trying to, honor me and recognize my service. And I would not have come had I known that Phil was going to say the things that he did. I was just told to come over here and talk about trade issues for Finley Lewis's benefit. But the fact is, I have colleagues who've been saying that, I've been serving as we have 6-year term limits, and for 14 years I've been the chairman or ranking member of the Rules Committee, and this place is not going to function without you. And I'm reminded so of Charles de Gaulle's famous line, "The cemetery is filled with indispensable people." I mean, I have, and when I announced that I was going to leave the Congress, I said somewhat tongue-in-cheek that I was going to do my small part to improve the 9% approval rating of the institution by getting the heck out. But I also want to say that beyond just ribbing Phil and all, I was thinking when he did refer to the fact that it was a heck of a long time ago that I came here, that a lot of the platform on which I ran and many of the very, very potent arguments that I used emanated from research that was done by the Heritage Foundation. And when I think about, I was thinking back, because one of the big issues then was the establishment of the Department of Energy, which Jimmy Carter had done in the 1970s. And when I ran, I remember very well, and I didn't think of it until you were talking about this this time frame, Phil, that I was able to use some of the papers that were being provided right then by Heritage in the arguments that I was making pretty regularly, and have continued to this day. And so I've always appreciated the work in spite of Ed Fulner's presence. I suspect that you all can overcome the fact that Ed Fulner is around, and I appreciate his boycotting my appearance here today. But I will say that he has been. I hope we're recording this for him, because I want to make sure that he gets. Yep, you play this back to him. You play this back to him. But no, everyone here has been great to work with, and I appreciate it. And since Phil did mention going back that long distance, and my charge here is to look forward, I'm reminded of November 6, 1979. November 6, 1979 was the date that Ronald Reagan announced his candidacy for President of the United States. And there was a lot of heresy in that announcement, things that were absolute lunacy. And one of them was that he envisaged the notion of an accord of trade among all the Americas, eliminating tariff and non-tariff barriers so that we could see the free flow of goods and services and capital and ideas and, dare I say it, even people, I think, was part of the argument that Ronald Reagan was putting forward when he announced his candidacy for president in 1979. And it was his understanding of freedom, and that's why I have lots of conservative friends who are virulently opposed to the concept of free trade. And my response off the top is that you're opposed to freedom. I had an interesting, very, very, very rigorous discussion over dinner with an extraordinarily prominent top talk radio host, a woman in this town, and who I've known for a long period of time, and she and I got into this clash on the issue. And to me, it is all about freedom. And I know you can go back and look at the McKinley tradition of protectionism that has existed in the Republican Party, but if you really look at where it is that we're going, that free flow is something that is important, and I believe, at really the basis of our party. And I know that tariffs have had a long history throughout our now 223 years. This week we mark the 225th anniversary of the signing of the Constitution, but our government's been in place for 223 years. And there's been a roller coaster ride on it, but I believe that really 1947 was the seminal date when we saw the post-war leaders having gone through what most economists, regardless of their persuasion, recognized played a role in the strengthening of the hand of Adolf Hitler, that being the rest of the world sticking their head in the sand, including the United States of America, and promoting protectionism, cutting them off, and obviously that, again, regardless of the stripe, most all economists acknowledge that behavior played a role in the strengthening of Hitler and the Third Reich, and it played a role in getting us to 1947, which is when those post-war leaders established the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and had this notion that eliminating those barriers would inure to the benefit of consumers and workers all over the world. And so I really do believe it's an issue that should be bipartisan, and I prefer it to be bipartisan, and I've always done everything that I possibly can to encourage it as a bipartisan issue. But we all know of the barriers that have stood in the way. So rushing forward, I will say that, Phil, you mentioned the North American Free Trade Agreement. I joined with two of my colleagues, one current colleague who's also leaving Congress at the end of this year, Jerry Lewis, and one former colleague, Jim Colby. And we in 1987 introduced the first bill that called for the elimination of tariff barriers among Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And we all know the ride that we went through on that issue. And I still to this day have constituents who will come to me and say, I have a hangnail. And I'm convinced that your North American Free Trade Agreement created this hangnail that I'm suffering from today. And we know that there's so many people who claim that every ailment of society stems from this notion of trade liberalization. And it's wrong. It's ill-founded. And I think that historically, and Phil touched on the enhancement of our GDP growth based on opening up new markets, and also the overall benefit that imports have. And I remember talking to Greenspan one time about this, and he said, imports are really more than half of the equation. We so often tend to embrace the neo-mercantilist view that the only benefit of trade is exporting. Yeah, we know 96% of the world's consumers are outside of our borders. It's so important for us to do everything that we possibly can to create good manufacturing jobs in the United States so we can sell this stuff overseas. Well, that's all well and good. But to produce things manufactured here, you also have to have access to the best quality product at the lowest possible price, and a lot of that happens to be raw materials that go into the manufacturing of those goods that are exported. And so that's why, we so often when we think about imports, we think about the argument that I regularly like to make when talking about the issue, and that is the single mother who's able to make ends meet and provide toys for her children by going to Walmart, Kmart, or wherever to buy those things. And because of the fact that the world has access to the U.S. consumer market, it enhances our standard of living and the quality of life here. But we just can't forget the access, the raw materials that come in that lead the United States to be still, contrary to the overall general perception, the largest manufacturing nation on the face of the earth, which we continue to be today. And so I think that if you look at the fact that we've been able to pursue this, trade is in and of itself a challenge in not just the United States of America as a political issue, but it's a challenge all over the world as people look at the potential benefits and what they see as the downside. And I will acknowledge that not every single person or sector is an immediate beneficiary of free trade. But I will say this, as you look at the issue of free trade, it is not what so many people argue, a zero-sum game. It is a win-win. And at the end of the day, if you subscribe, as I do, to the economic theory of comparative advantage, that being that one does what they do best, then clearly the notion of breaking down those barriers is very important. We have gone through the political challenge of the passage of these most recent free trade agreements, that being the Panama, Colombia, and South Korea deals. It took virtually a decade to get it done, and unfortunately it ended up being a very partisan issue. And with all due respect, it was not easy to get President Obama to be supportive. Just days after he was elected in 2008, I'll tell you a little funny story about this. Just days after he was elected in 2008, he called. I remember famously he called Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, and she hung up on him a couple of times. Not because it was Barack Obama, because she didn't believe that he was calling her. But yeah, if you recall that, you remember that, Phil? Yeah. And so I took his call when he called, and I had known him. He called me shortly after he was elected to the Senate, and I talked to him actually about some democracy-building efforts in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and we talked about a number of issues. But when he called, he asked me, as we looked at this terrible economy that he was inheriting and what needed to be done, he said, well, what should I be doing? And right off the bat, I said, well, the first thing you can do is since Nancy Pelosi stood in the way of our passing the deal that was sent up, that was negotiated by President Bush to pry open the market so that we can create good union jobs for Caterpillar and Whirlpool and all these companies in the Midwest, send us immediately the Columbia Free Trade Agreement. And I can tell you, Democrats and Republicans in the Congress are going to vote for it. It'll pass if you send it up. I wasn't yelling at him. I just said that. I mean, I feel strongly about it because of everything that happened in the aftermath of it. And so every time I was with him, I raised this issue and talked with him about it. Oh yeah, he totally agreed with me, of course. Totally agreed with me. Believed it. He said, well, I think that we might have a few things that we need to negotiate. But I said, just get it done. Get it up here. So fast forward to the signing of the bill. When was it, Rachel, that we had the signing of the fall of last year? So basically a year ago right now. We had the signing, and I was standing in the Oval Office with the President, and I said to him, oh, Mr. President, I said, I'm glad that we finally done this. I said, do you remember my talking to you about this right after the election? He said, oh, absolutely. He said, yeah. He said, yeah, I remember our very, and look how quickly we got it done. He thought that I was talking about a conversation we had after the 2010 election, and I said, Mr. President, no, it was after your election in 2008. So the upshot is it took so long, and if you think about the market share that we were losing every single day that we failed to take action, I mean, it's just, to me, it's virtually criminal because, that is, it's hurting the shared bipartisan quest of job creation and economic growth. And so then, we finally have gotten that done. I'm very gratified that we've gotten it done. But today, we have a very similar situation on an issue that is costing us U.S. jobs. Clearly, we all know that Vladimir Putin is a bad guy. Do I need to explain to anyone here that his attempt to reassemble the former Soviet Union, the fact that he's using the Russian Orthodox Church, his economic empire with state-owned industries acquiring businesses in the former Soviet republics, and the Soviet legacy standing on the shoulders of the great people who launched Sputnik and then claiming that the demise of the Soviet Union was the single most tragic development of the 20th century. So, okay, Vladimir Putin is not a Jeffersonian Democrat, okay, so we can acknowledge that. Having said that, I think it's important for us to note that they, on August 22nd, became a member of the World Trade Organization. Okay? They negotiated the final dispute that existed on Abkhazia and South Ossetia, the border dispute with Georgia. Georgia supported the entry into the WTO, and so Russia is in a position where they are going to be faced with the consequences of living with a rules-based trading system. I mean, whether it's the violation of intellectual property rights, you can go down all of the constraints that exist within that structure. There is a problem. There are 140 million consumers in Russia, and there's only one developed country that's not able to have access and get their values and products and goods and services into that market. It's the United States of America. Republicans are ready, and we have been. 73 of the 87 freshman members sent a letter to President Obama saying, send up that Russia PNTR bill so that we can get it done because we know that it's going to create jobs here in the United States. Remember, this is the freshman class where if you believed everything in the media, every single one of these 87 members would have been carrying an Obama is a Nazi sign, and that's all they would have believed. The fact of the matter is, these people have understood, this new class, I'm so impressed with them, understood the benefits of our global leadership role and what needs to be done. And PNTR is one of those very, very important items. And just like it took them, we were dragged kicking and screaming to finally support the Panama, Colombia, and South Korea deals, we have not seen the effort put into place that should be there from the White House to support the notion of Russia PNTR. And so that needs to get done. We were hoping to do it this week, and we have continued to encourage them as much as possible. But there are jobs being lost every single day due to our lack of action on that issue. And so we want it to be done in a bipartisan way. which is the way trade needs to be done. So we look at where it is that we're going from here on the issue of trade. And there's so many things that have changed in all of our lives. I mean, just the technological changes are something that need to be looked at. We all know that the Doha round of the WTO is dead. I mean, people are often afraid to say that, but it is. I mean, it is a fait accompli. I don't know of anyone who truly believes that we'll be able to lift up that structure. So I think that rather than commiserating and wringing our hands about the death of the Doha round of the WTO, the smart thing for us to do would be to focus attention on where we go in this 21st century, looking at our economic leadership role in the world. And so I think that there are a number of things that exist today that didn't exist even when the Doha round was launched. And one of the important aspects of that, of course, is the notion of dealing with cross-border data flows. Information is what is so critical for all of us in everything that we do. And the idea of being able to facilitate negotiations to deal with the flow of that information is something that needs to be addressed. That needs to be part of a whole new concept on the trade question. And along with that, I think that if we look at the geopolitical ramifications of the upheaval in the Arab world, for example, I think that we need to recognize that this, what I like to describe as the interdependence of economic and political liberalization, is the wave of the future. I mean, I always pointed to the past at 4 countries in the late 1980s. I mean, we're talking more than 2 decades ago, that had repressive, authoritarian dictatorships. And while we maintained economic engagement, we were able to bring about political liberalization. 2 in this hemisphere and 2 in Asia, Taiwan and South Korea, and Argentina and Chile. You can go back and look at those policies. Augusto Pinochet, everyone remembers. And we maintained our economic ties there. Chile, of course, a country through the 1980s, was the one nation on the South American continent that was continuing to service its debt during the crisis that Brazil and other countries went through. And we maintained that economic engagement, and it brought about the kind of political liberalization that we see today, with free and fair elections, rigorous parliamentary democracies that exist. I believe that we need to do the same thing as we look at the upheaval in the Arab world. And so one of the things that I've done in a bipartisan way, my Democratic colleague Gregory Meeks from New York has joined me. I've introduced legislation calling for negotiations to begin on a U.S.-Egypt free trade agreement, and similarly on a U.S.-Tunisia free trade agreement. And I believe that as we look at that question of why would we be doing that now? Well, people talk about the problems that are there, and we were all very, very saddened with the developments in Libya. In the assassination of Ambassador Stevens, I was just addressing this morning a group that our House Democracy Partnership has co-hosted of members of Parliament and other leaders from Morocco, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt. These are leaders who have come in, and their message is an overwhelming one. And when I talk about this notion of strengthening the economic ties, it is received extremely well. And as we look at the idea of the hatred that some in the Arab world have for those of us in the West, the idea of encouraging more FDI, foreign direct investment, the idea of doing what we can to, again, not only ensure that we have access to their market, but they to ours, that we're able to do what we can to build that tie, I think will go a long way towards addressing many of the concerns that we have. Think about it. There are a wide range of very diverse views in the Arab world. And there are lots of things that people believe need to be done to address the issues. But there's one thing around which they can all rally, and that is on February 11th of last year in Egypt, Hosni Mubarak was thrown out of office. Since that time, 2 million jobs have been lost. So whether you're a Salafi, a Muslim Brotherhood, or a secularist in Egypt, the notion of encouraging enhanced gross domestic product growth, job creation, and economic growth is very, very vital. and very, very important. And so I see, as we look at the wave of the future, I see these economic issues as being absolutely vital to the geopolitical questions that we are going to face. I think that economic issues are going to really be the driving force here, and I think that we've got an opportunity as the world's only complete superpower, militarily, economically, and geopolitically, to do just that. I've regularly argued that if we don't shape the global economy, we will be shaped by it. Because if you look at the number of bilateral trade agreements that have been put together, as we were waiting on the Canada one, I remember just the numbers, on the Colombia one, Canada, Mandarin Chinese is the second most taught language in Colombia today. Not a lot of people know that. And so and a lot of those developments were taking place as we were sitting on the sidelines. So that's why I believe that completely reshaping where it is we go on this issue is important. And the other challenge that we have is to ensure broad-based public support for this. And that's why education is so critical. One of the things that I've been frustrated with over the years is that businesses that are beneficiaries of globalization and trade have not expended the kind of time and energy and effort they need to on building a broad base of public support for this. I use the example of the hangnail in the North American Free Trade Agreement. I mean, it's a bit of a stretch, but I mean, people will, anytime there's a problem, they like to point to trade as the issue. We need to have an understanding. I mean, one of the things that, frankly, has led to this lack of support from a number of businesses is that they're in the midst of negotiations. What kind of negotiations? Labor negotiations. And we all know where the leadership of the union movement is in this country. I believe that there's very little that is more anti-union than sticking your head in the sand and not being supportive of free trade agreements. Because again, with 96% of the world's consumers outside of our borders, I use the example of Colombia with John Deere, Caterpillar, Whirlpool, selling washing machines and tractors into Colombia creates union jobs right here. So I believe that the union leadership is actually countering the best interests of rank-and-file union membership by doing what it is that they have consistently done. But having said that, I think, and Heritage has been fantastic at promoting the benefits of this, and I very much appreciated it, but we need to use the new media, we need to do everything that we can to constantly let people know that their standard of living and quality of life has improved because of economic and trade liberalization that has taken place here in the United States and around the world. And I believe that if we're successful at that, that will lay the groundwork for the kind of future that on November 6th of 1979, when Ronald Reagan made that announcement, and as is stated in those three great lines at the base of his statue that's standing in the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol, America's best days are yet to come, our proudest moments are yet to be, our most glorious achievements are just ahead. Thank you all very much.